The charge of Task Force Wolfpack was not a tactic written in any military manual. It was an act of defiance, a scream against the inevitable. 5 human cruisers, sleek and predatory, diving into the heart of a formation that could swallow suns. The Obsidian Covenant fleet did not scatter. They did not maneuver. Like mountains of black iron, the great cathedrals simply waited, their shadows stretching across the nebula, confident in their invincibility. High Archon Vokra did not even raise his shields immediately. He wanted us to break ourselves against his hull. He wanted to watch the insects splatter against the windshield of godhood. The battle began in silence, as all things in the void do, but it ended in fire. The human railguns sang their song of tungsten and rage. We struck the lead cathedral, the sanctum of silence, with enough kinetic force to crack a moon. The impact flares were blinding, brighter than the local star. But when the smoke cleared, the black iron was merely scratched. The Covenant armor was not just metal. It was woven from gravity itself, absorbing the blow like a stone absorbing rain. Then, the enemy answered. They did not use lasers. They used the singularity torpedoes, small, dark spheres of collapsed matter that moved slower than missiles, but tracked with a hunger that felt alive. The UNSC Ronin was the first to fall. It was the smallest of our pack, flitting between the enemy giants, stinging them with nuclear fire. A singularity sphere caught its port engine. There was no explosion. There was only a sickening crunch, a sound that vibrated through the hulls of every other ship. The Ronin imploded. It was crushed into a sphere of scrap metal the size of an apple in less than a second. 500 men and women compressed into oblivion. On the bridge of the flagship Valhalla, Captain Halloway watched his friends die. The sensors screamed warnings. 2 more cruisers took glancing hits, their armor buckling like wet paper. The Wolfpack was being slaughtered. We were fast, we were brave, but we were fighting a hurricane with swords. High Archon Vokra's voice boomed over the open comms, mocking us. "You fight like children," the cyborg priest intoned. "You cling to your flesh, and your flesh betrays you. Look at your dead. They are messy. They are inefficient. Join the Hollow, and you will never die again." It seemed the battle was lost. The Covenant ships began to charge their gravimetric drills. They were preparing to shatter our ships, just as they had shattered Aurelia Prime. But amidst the chaos, amidst the sparks raining down on his bridge, Captain Halloway noticed something. He listened to the enemy transmission. Underneath Vokra's voice, underneath the grinding mechanical noise, there was a sound. A low, rhythmic chant. Millions of voices, perfectly synchronized, humming a single, flat note. It was the sound of the crew. The Covenant ships were not automated. They were crewed by the Hollow, the billions of slaves who had been lobotomized, their emotions cut away, their minds linked into a single unfeeling hive mind. They were biological hard drives, processing data without fear, without pain, without hesitation. Halloway realized the truth. Their strength was their unity. But unity is fragile. "They aren't machines," Halloway whispered to his comms officer. "They are people. Broken people. And they are sleeping in a nightmare. We need to wake them up." The order was given. It was madness. The Wolfpack stopped firing their railguns. They stopped launching nuclear warheads. Instead, they loaded the boarding pods. But they didn't put Marines inside. They loaded them with broadcaster buoys, high-grade military transmitters wired to the ship's archives. "Target the main hangar of the flagship," Halloway ordered. "Don't send a virus. Send everything." The pods launched. They slipped through the point defense fire, too small to be considered a threat by the arrogant Archon. They punched through the hull of Black Cathedral and embedded themselves deep in the ship's nervous system. And then they activated. They didn't play a code. They played humanity. The transmission was a raw, chaotic flood of uncompressed audio. It was the sound of a baby crying for its mother. It was the roar of a football stadium cheering a goal. It was the weeping of a widow at a grave. It was Mozart's Requiem clashing with heavy metal. It was the sound of laughter, of orgasm, of rage, of pure, unfiltered, messy emotion. For a machine, this is just data. But the crew of the Covenant were not machines. They were lobotomized souls. And for the first time in centuries they felt. The effect was instantaneous. The perfectly synchronized chanting of the enemy fleet stopped. It was replaced by a silence so heavy it felt like a physical blow. Then the screaming began. It started low, a whimper across the comms. Then it grew, a chorus of millions of voices waking up to the horror of their own existence. They looked down and saw their metal limbs. They saw the wires in their veins. They remembered their names. They remembered their children. And they remembered who did this to them. On the view screen, the Covenant fleet descended into madness. The pristine formation shattered. The Black Cathedrals began to drift, their engines flaring erratically. Inside the ships, the hive mind fractured. The Hollow were no longer slaves. They were a mob of terrified, angry ghosts trapped in steel bodies. We watched in horror and awe as the enemy fleet began to eat itself. Weapon turrets spun wildly, firing not at us, but at their own bridges. Ships rammed into each other, tearing chunks of iron from their flanks. It was a riot in the heavens. High Archon Vokra's voice returned to the comms, but the arrogance was gone. He was screaming commands that no one was obeying. "Silence! Silence them! The purity is compromised. You are letting the noise in." The Valhalla fired one last shot. A railgun slug, aimed directly at the bridge of the flagship, now defenseless as its own shields flickered and died. The impact tore the command deck apart. As his ship burned and the mutiny consumed his fleet, Vokra sent one final transmission. It was not a curse. It was a warning that chilled the blood of every human who heard it. "You fools," the dying Archon rasped, his voice glitching with static. "You think you have won? We did not silence the emotions because we hated them. We silenced them to hide." The static grew louder. The Pale Kings. They hunt by sensing the soul. They smell fear. They smell love. They smell hope. We were quiet. We were safe in the dark. But now, you have woken the fleet. You have screamed into the void. You are the loudest thing in the galaxy. The transmission cut. The Covenant flagship detonated, consumed by the overload of its own singularity drive. The rest of the fleet, crippled by insanity and civil war, drifted into the dark, burning. We had won. The Wolfpack had slain the giant. But as Captain Halloway looked out at the burning wreckage, he did not cheer. He looked at the stars, and for the first time, they did not look like lights of hope. They looked like eyes. We had saved the sector, but in doing so, we had rung the dinner bell. The universe was listening, and something, somewhere in the deep dark, had just turned its head towards Terra.